"Go eat outside on the street, you beggar!" My son Ryan shouted when I tried to sit down at the table. I took a deep breath, motioned to the waiter, and answered calmly, "That's fine, but then you're the ones who will have to leave." The words left my mouth with a calmness that surprised even me. Every person in the Golden Crown restaurant turned to look at us. Ryan froze his face, turning beet red with shame. His wife Jessica dropped her wine glass on the white tablecloth. What my son didn't know was who I really am. My name is Susan. I'm 65 years old, and tonight everything was about to change forever. But let me tell you how I got to that moment, because what happened after I spoke was something that no one, absolutely no one, expected. It all started 3 hours earlier when Ryan called me. "Mom, I want to take you to dinner at the best restaurant in the city. I have something to celebrate, and I want you there." Life. I got ready so carefully that night. I put on my best dress, an emerald green one I had bought years ago but rarely wore. I did my hair, put on a little makeup, and even wore the pearl earrings that belonged to my mother. I wanted to look presentable for my successful son. Ryan had done very well for himself over the last few years. He was a regional manager at a major company, had a big house in the most exclusive neighborhood, and his wife Jessica always wore expensive clothes. But with me, his own mother, he had become colder and more distant. I arrived at the Golden Crown right at 8 o'clock. It was an elegant place with white tablecloths, crystal glasses, and waiters in tuxedos. The kind of place where a single dinner costs over $200 per person. A place I knew very well, though Ryan had no idea. When I asked for Ryan Miller's table, the waiter, Anthony, looked me up and down. My green dress, while my best, looked modest compared to the designer outfits on the other women. "Of course, ma'am. Follow me, please," he said with a professional smile. I walked behind him between the tables, feeling all the curious eyes on me. Some people whispered to each other, probably wondering what a woman like me was doing in such an exclusive place. Ryan was already sitting at a table in the center next to Jessica. She wore a pricey red dress and jewels that sparkled under the restaurant lights. As I got closer, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There was no chair for me. "Hello, son," I said with a forced smile, expecting him to get up for a hug or at least explain where I should sit. Ryan just looked at me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, Mom, you made it." He didn't get up. He didn't greet me warmly. Jessica didn't even look up from her plate. "And my chair?" I asked, feeling more and more uncomfortable. "Your chair." Ryan started to laugh, but it wasn't a happy laugh. It was cruel. "Mom, I didn't invite you to dinner. I told you to come so you could see how successful people live, so you can understand the difference between you and us." It felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. People at the nearby table started paying more attention. "Son, I don't understand," I mumbled, trying to keep my dignity. "You don't understand." Ryan raised his voice. "Mom, look at yourself. Look at this place. Do you really think you belong here? We come here every week. We spend more on one dinner than you spend in a whole month." Jessica finally spoke without looking up from her food. "Ryan, don't be so harsh. It's not your mother's fault she is, well, the way she is." Those words hurt more than my own son's. The humiliation was so intense, I felt tears welling up in my eyes. But there was something they didn't know. Something I had kept secret for all these years. And that night, that secret was about to come out in the most spectacular way possible. "Ryan, please," I whispered, trying to control the tremble in my voice. "I just wanted to spend some time with you. It's been months since we've talked like mother and son." My son leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms like he was enjoying my discomfort. "Talk? What are we going to talk about, Mom?" "Your boring life, how you spend your days watching soap operas in your tiny apartment." The people at the nearby tables weren't even pretending not to listen anymore. An elegant couple at the next table exchanged pitying glances in my direction. I felt the heat rise in my neck, but something inside told me to stay calm. "Son, I work hard. I've always worked hard to get by." I replied, trying to hold on to my dignity. "I don't have much money, it's true, but I have my pride." Jessica let out a small, contemptuous laugh. "Pride. Susan, forgive me, but what could you possibly be proud of? You live in a 2-bedroom apartment, take the bus everywhere, and buy your clothes at discount stores. Every word was a stab, but what hurt most was the satisfied smirk on my son's face. How did he become this cruel person? Where was the sweet boy I had raised with so much love? Mom. Ryan continued, raising his voice so more people could hear. The truth is, I'm embarrassed to introduce you as my mother. Look at Jessica. Look how she dresses, how she talks, how she carries herself. That's the kind of woman who belongs with someone like me. Jessica smiled pleased and adjusted her dyed blonde hair. Her red dress must have cost over $1,000, and her shoes were an Italian brand I knew very well, too well. Jessica comes from an important family, Ryan went on. Her mother went to a private university, speaks 3 languages, and understands business. And you? What can you teach me how to survive on $200 a week? Tears threatened to spill, but I held them back. There was something Ryan didn't know, something Jessica didn't know, something no one in my family knew, and tonight it was about to change their lives forever. The waiter Anthony approached our table discreetly. I had known him for years, though he couldn't say anything right now. He looked at me with concern in his eyes. "Would you like to order anything else?" he asked politely. "No thanks," Ryan answered sharply. "My mother won't be dining with us. In fact, I think it's time for her to leave." "But son," I murmured, "I thought you said you wanted to celebrate something with me." Ryan laughed again. "Celebrate with you, Mom. What I want to celebrate is my promotion, my new position, my successful life. Do you think I want to celebrate that with someone who reminds me of where I came from, Jessica, and I belong to a different social class than you?" "Ryan's right," Jessica added, taking a sip of her $100 a bottle wine. "We come to places like this because we can afford it. We have the money, the education, and the social standing to be here. It's nothing personal against you, Susan, but there are differences you just can't ignore." I looked around the restaurant. It really was beautiful. The crystal chandeliers glowed softly, the paintings on the walls were original works of art, and the piano music created a perfect atmosphere. Every detail had been carefully chosen to create the most elegant experience possible. "This restaurant really is beautiful," I commented softly. "Of course it's beautiful," Ryan replied with arrogance. "It's the most expensive in the entire city. The waiting list for a table here is 3 months long. But when you have money and connections like us, doors open for you." Jessica nodded. "We know the manager, the chef, and even the owner." "Well, Ryan knows the owner personally. That's why we always get the best table." A small smile appeared on my lips. If only they knew the truth about who really knows the owner of this restaurant. "Mom, why are you smiling like that?" Ryan looked at me with suspicion. "Do you find it funny that I'm explaining how the real world works?" "No, son," I answered calmly. "I was just thinking about something." "About what?" "That you're right about one thing. There are indeed differences that can't be ignored. Differences you don't know about, but that are going to become very clear tonight." Ryan and Jessica exchanged a confused look. My tone had changed. I no longer sounded like the humble, submissive mother they knew. "What are you talking about?" Jessica asked, a little uneasy. Before I could answer, another man approached the table. It was Oscar, the restaurant's general manager, a distinguished man in his 50s with an impeccable suit and refined manners. "Good evening," he greeted politely. "Is everything all right at your table?" Ryan sat up straighter, obviously pleased to get the manager's attention. "Everything's perfect, Oscar. As always, the service is exceptional." Oscar smiled professionally, but when his eyes met mine, I saw a flicker of recognition. He knew who I was. "Of course. I'm glad to hear that," Oscar replied. Then he looked directly at me. "Ma'am, are you enjoying your visit tonight?" The question seemed innocent, but there was something more behind it. Ryan didn't notice, but I did. Oscar was waiting for my signal. "Oscar," I said in a firm voice, "I think it's time for you to speak with the owner. There's a situation here that requires his immediate attention." Oscar nodded slowly as if he had been waiting for those words all night. "Of course, ma'am. The owner will be right here." Ryan frowned, clearly confused by the exchange. The owner. What are you talking about, Mom? Do you know the manager of this place? Jessica looked just as bewildered. Susan, how do you know Oscar? I smiled but didn't answer. I just waited. The next few minutes would be the most important of my life, and definitely the most shocking for my son. Meanwhile, Ryan turned to Oscar with his typical arrogance. Hey, Oscar, I don't know what's going on here, but my mother has been a little confused lately. Sometimes she says things that don't make sense. Her age, you know. Oscar kept his professional smile but said nothing. His silence only increased the tension at the table. Why aren't you answering? Ryan insisted. Do you actually know my mother? Young Mr. Miller. Oscar replied carefully. I think it's best if we wait for the owner. He will be able to clear up all your doubts. Jessica leaned closer to Ryan and whispered, This is very weird. Your mother is acting strangely. Do you think she's okay? Her words were just loud enough for me to hear, but instead of hurting me, they gave me more strength because I knew that in a few minutes she would eat every single one of them. People at the nearby tables had noticed the tension. Some diners had stopped eating to discreetly watch what was happening. The murmur of conversation had died down as if the entire restaurant was holding its breath. Ryan started to get impatient. Mom, this is ridiculous. I don't know what game you're playing, but it's over. Jessica and I want to enjoy our dinner in peace. In peace, I repeated, my voice growing firmer. Like the peace you've given me all these years, like the peace of being treated like a stranger by my own son. Enough! Ryan yelled, slamming his hand on the table. The glasses shook, and several people turned completely towards us. You're making a scene. You're embarrassing me in front of all these important people. Jessica put her hand on Ryan's arm. Calm down, honey. People are watching us. Exactly. Ryan stood up, his face red with anger. Mom, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Right now. You're ruining my night, my celebration, my reputation. I remained seated, completely calm. Your reputation? You're just different from us. You belong to another world, a world of common people, of people with no ambition, of people who settle for less. The words echoed through the restaurant. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Even the waiters had stopped to watch the scene. Jessica stood up too. Susan, please, Ryan is right. This isn't your place. Look around you. Look at how other people see you. They're looking at you with pity. She was right about one thing. People were looking at me, but not with pity. There was something else in their expressions. Curiosity, expectation, as if they knew something big was about to happen. Do you know how much this dinner costs, Mom? Ryan continued, pointing at the table. $300, just for what we've had so far. That's more than you spend on groceries in a month. And do you know how much the wine you're drinking costs? I added quietly. $250 a bottle. Dom Perignon 2015. An excellent choice. Ryan stared at me, surprised. How do you know that? Because I know this place well, son. Very well. Jessica laughed. You know this place well since when? From looking at the menu outside. Her comment drew a few nervous chuckles from nearby tables, but I didn't flinch. Just then, a familiar figure walked towards our table. It was a distinguished man in his 60s with a perfectly tailored gray suit and a presence that commanded immediate respect. Oscar followed closely behind him. Ryan recognized him immediately. Mr. Hector, he exclaimed with a sycophantic smile. What an honor to see you here. I'm Ryan Miller. I believe we met briefly at the business conference last month. Hector nodded politely. Yes, I vaguely recall. But his eyes were fixed on me. Good evening, Susan. The way he said my name made Ryan freeze. It wasn't the greeting of a successful businessman to a common old woman. It was the greeting of someone who knew me well. Very well. Good evening, Hector, I replied naturally. I'm so sorry you had to come down here for this. Jessica looked at Ryan, completely confused. How does your mother know Mr. Hector? Ryan stammered. I don't know. Mom, how do you know Mr. Hector? Hector moved closer to the table, and his presence made all the nearby diners fall completely silent. "Mrs. Miller," he said to me formally, "is there a problem I need to resolve?" The formal way he addressed me as Mrs. Miller made Ryan frown even more. Why would such an important man speak to me with so much respect? "Yes, there is a problem," I answered clearly. "My son and his wife have gravely disrespected me. They have publicly humiliated me in this restaurant, told me I don't belong here, and have asked me to leave." Hector nodded seriously. "I see. And what would you like me to do about it?" Ryan interrupted desperately. "Wait, Mr. Hector, there's a misunderstanding. My mother is exaggerating. I was just explaining to her that this place is a bit sophisticated for her." Hector turned to Ryan with a cold expression. "Sophisticated for her? You're telling your mother she has no right to be in this restaurant?" "That's not it," Ryan protested. "It's just, well, she can't afford a dinner here. She lives on $200 a week. This is beyond her means." Jessica nodded vigorously. "Exactly. We weren't being cruel, just realistic. This place costs a fortune." Hector looked back at me. "Is that true, Susan? You can't afford to dine here?" A slow smile spread across my face. It was the moment I had been waiting for years, the moment my son would find out who his mother really was. "Well, Hector," I said, rising from my chair, "that depends on how you look at it." I took an envelope from my purse that I had been carrying for months, waiting for the perfect moment. I placed it on the table, right in front of Ryan. "What's that?" Jessica asked suspiciously. "Open it," I told Ryan. "Open it and read what it says." Ryan picked up the envelope with trembling hands. Jessica leaned in for a better look. As Ryan pulled out the documents and began to read, his face turned white as a sheet. "No, this can't be," he muttered. "What does it say?" Jessica asked anxiously, trying to see over his shoulder. "What can't be?" Ryan read aloud, his voice trembling. "Deed of ownership, the Golden Crown Restaurant. Owner, Susan Miller." His voice faded to a whisper. "Date of acquisition, March 15th, 2018. The silence that followed was deafening. The people at nearby tables had completely stopped pretending not to listen. Some had even stood up slightly to get a better view. Jessica snatched the papers from Ryan's hands. "This has to be fake. It has to be a joke. Susan, these documents are fake." Hector cleared his throat. "Mrs. Miller, I assure you those documents are completely authentic. Mrs. Susan Miller is indeed the owner of this restaurant, and also of 4 other restaurants in the city." "4 other restaurants?" Ryan exclaimed, still in shock. "Mom, this is impossible. You live in a small apartment. You take the bus. You shop at discount stores." I sat back down, feeling more powerful than I had in years. "That's true, son. I live simply because I choose to. But that doesn't mean I don't have money." "How much money?" Jessica asked, her voice barely a whisper. Hector answered for me. "Mrs. Miller has a net worth of approximately $8 million. Her restaurants generate annual profits of nearly $2 million. Ryan sank into his chair as if he'd been physically struck. $8 million. "Why?" Jessica murmured. "Why did you never tell us?" I leaned back in my chair, watching the shocked and confused faces of my son and his wife. Because I wanted to know the true character of the people around me. I wanted to know if you would love me for who I am, not for what I have. "But Mom," Ryan stammered, "I'm your son. How could you hide something like this from me? How could I hide it?" I repeated, my voice filling with years of pent-up anger. "Are you really asking me that after everything I've heard tonight?" I stood up again, and this time my posture was completely different. I was no longer the humble, submissive old woman. I was a successful businesswoman, a millionaire who had built an empire from scratch. "Ryan, for the last 5 years, ever since you started to become successful at your job, you have treated me like a burden. You have made me feel ashamed of how I look, how I dress, how I live." People at the nearby tables began to murmur among themselves. Some discreetly took out their phones, probably to record what was happening. Remember last Christmas, I continued, when you told me it was better if I didn't come to your party because I wouldn't fit in with your important guests? Ryan shrank in his seat. Mom, Or Jessica's birthday 6 months ago, when you told me there was a dress code and my clothes weren't appropriate for the event. Jessica avoided my gaze, clearly uncomfortable. All this time, I went on, you have assumed that I am poor, that I am a burden, that I am someone to be ashamed of. And tonight, you confirmed exactly what I suspected about you. Oscar discreetly approached and whispered in my ear, Mrs. Miller, would you like us to ask them to leave the restaurant? Before I could answer, Ryan stood up abruptly. Wait, Mom, if you have so much money, why do you live the way you do? Why didn't you tell me anything? We're family. Family? I laughed, but it was not a happy laugh. Family? Ryan, 15 minutes ago, you yelled at me to go eat on the street like a beggar. Is that what family does? Jessica tried to intervene. Susan, if we had known... If you had known what? I cut her off. If you had known I had money, you would have treated me with respect. Is that your definition of family love? Conditional respect based on financial status? A murmur of approval came from the nearby tables. Clearly the other diners were enjoying the show, and many seemed to be on my side. Mom, please, Ryan begged. We can talk about this at home, in private. In private? I gestured around the restaurant. Like when you humiliated me in public just a few minutes ago? Like when you told all these witnesses that I don't belong here? Hector stepped closer to me. Mrs. Miller, as the general manager of your properties, I must ask, do you wish for us to take any specific action? Ryan turned to Hector in desperation. Mr. Hector, please. She's my mother. There must be some way to resolve this. Young man, Hector replied coldly, you just spent the last 30 minutes insulting and humiliating the owner of this establishment. Not only that, but you did it in front of dozens of witnesses. Jessica started to cry. We didn't know. If we had known she was the owner, we never would have... Never would have what? I interrupted. Never would have disrespected me. You only respect rich people. What kind of values are those? An elegant man at a nearby table began to applaud slowly. Soon other people joined in. It wasn't mocking applause, but one of admiration. They were applauding my stand, my dignity, my handling of the situation. Ryan looked around, noticing for the first time that the entire restaurant's attention was on us. Mom, people are looking at us. Yes, they are, I confirmed. They are seeing exactly the kind of person you really are. They are seeing how you treat your own mother when you think she has nothing to offer you. But now I know you have money, Ryan said desperately. Now we know the truth. We can start over. Start over. I laughed bitterly. Now that you know I have money, you want to start over. Now I'm suddenly good enough to be your mother. Jessica wiped her tears and tried to take my hand. Susan, please forgive us. We didn't know. I pulled my hand away sharply. Jessica, an hour ago you told me that Ryan was ashamed to introduce me as his mother. You told me I didn't have the education, the social class, or the money to be here. Do you remember? She nodded miserably. Well, you were right about one thing. There are indeed differences between us that cannot be ignored, but they are not the differences you thought. I walked towards the center of the restaurant where everyone could see and hear me clearly. My voice rose with an authority I had never before shown in front of my son. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, addressing the entire restaurant, I am very sorry for the interruption to your dinner, but I think it's important that you, as witnesses to what has just happened here, know the whole story. An absolute silence fell over the place. Even the waiters stopped to listen. Ryan tried to get up to stop me, but Hector placed a firm hand on his shoulder, forcing him to stay seated. My name is Susan Miller, and I am the owner of this restaurant, I continued. For the past 7 years, I have come here regularly, but always discreetly observing how my business operates, getting to know my employees, making sure my customers receive the best possible service. Some diners nodded, and I noticed that several now recognized me. The older lady who sometimes sat alone at the corner table, who always ordered the same thing and left generous tips. But tonight, I went on, I was invited here by my own son, who publicly humiliated me, insulted me, and asked me to leave because, according to him, I do not belong in this place. A murmur of disapproval rippled through the restaurant. The expressions on people's faces showed a mixture of shock, outrage, and pity. Ryan stood up abruptly. "Mom, stop. Don't do this. You're ruining my reputation." "Your reputation?" I turned to him with a cold smile. "Ryan, you ruined your own reputation the moment you decided to treat your mother like garbage in front of all these people." Jessica made one last attempt to save herself. "Susan, please understand our position. We had no way of knowing that I had money." I cut her off. "Is that really your excuse? That you didn't know I was wealthy, so it was okay to disrespect me?" An elegant woman at a nearby table spoke up loudly. "Exactly. Respect doesn't depend on how much money someone has. It's a matter of basic decency." Other voices joined in agreement. The atmosphere of the restaurant had completely changed. It was no longer an elegant, quiet dinner. It was the stage for a public lesson on dignity and family respect. I turned back to Ryan and Jessica. "But now that you know the truth, let me explain exactly how things are going to change." Ryan looked desperate. "Mom, please, we can talk about this in private. Not here, not in front of all these people." "Why not here?" I replied firmly. "You had no problem humiliating me here in front of all these people. So right here is where you're going to listen to what I have to say." Oscar approached and offered me a chair in the center, as if it were a stage. I sat down elegantly, feeling for the first time in years the power and respect I deserved. "Ryan," I began, "for the last 5 years since you started earning a good salary, you have changed completely. You have become arrogant, dismissive, and you have forgotten where you come from." "Mom, Don't interrupt me." My voice echoed through the restaurant. "Now you are going to listen. You are going to listen to everything I have to say." Ryan sank into his chair, clearly defeated. "Do you remember when you were 12 and you got pneumonia?" I continued. "Do you remember we didn't have health insurance and I worked 3 jobs for 2 months to pay for your treatment?" My voice broke slightly, remembering those hard times. "I worked in an office during the day, cleaned buildings at night, and waited tables on weekends. I slept 3 hours a night to make sure you had everything you needed." The people in the restaurant listened in absolute silence. Some older women had tears in their eyes. "And do you know why I did all that?" I asked, looking directly at Ryan. "Because I loved you. Because you were my son. Not because you had money, not because you could give me something in return, but because a mother's love is unconditional." Jessica started crying again, but these were no longer tears of self-pity. She seemed to be finally understanding the magnitude of what they had done. "But you, Ryan," I continued, "your love for me turned out to be completely conditional. You love me only when it's convenient, only when I don't embarrass you, only when I fit into your image of success." An older man at a table in the back shouted, "You tell him, ma'am. Tell him the truth." The audience's approval gave me even more strength. "Now let me tell you how I got my money, because it's important that you understand it wasn't luck or inheritance." Ryan looked up, clearly curious despite his humiliation. "After your father died when you were 15, I explained, I was left alone with a huge debt and a son to support. But instead of sinking into self-pity, I decided to fight." I stood up again, slowly, walking around the table as I spoke. "I started by working as a waitress in a small diner, but I didn't settle for that. I watched, I learned, I studied every aspect of the business. How the kitchen worked, how the finances were managed, how to treat customers." The silence in the restaurant was total. Even the staff had stopped working to listen to my story. After 5 years, when I had enough experience and savings, I took out a loan and bought my first small restaurant. It was a modest place in a humble neighborhood, but I turned it into a success. Jessica whispered, "That's why you know so much about restaurants." Bought after that was because I had proven I could make a business work. Ryan finally spoke, his voice broken. "Mom, I didn't know any of this." "You didn't know because you never asked," I snapped. "You were never interested in my life. You only cared that I didn't embarrass you in front of your successful friends." Hector stepped forward again. "Mrs. Miller, do you want us to proceed?" "What procedure?" Ryan asked in a panic. I turned to him with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "The expulsion procedure. As the owner of this establishment, I have the right to ban anyone who causes a disturbance or disrespects other customers." "You can't do that," Jessica cried. "We're family." "Family," I laughed. "An hour ago you told me I wasn't good enough to be part of your family. Now that you know I have money, suddenly we're family again." Spontaneous applause broke out from several tables. The diners were clearly enjoying watching justice unfold. Ryan stood up desperately. "Mom, please forgive me. Forgive us. We can change. We can be better." "You can change," I repeated. "You can be better." "Ryan, the problem isn't that you can change. The problem is, you only want to change now that you know I have money." I stepped closer to him, looking him straight in the eye. "Tell me one thing, son. If right now I told you that I didn't actually have any money, that this was all a joke, how would you treat me? Would you go back to telling me to leave the restaurant?" Ryan opened his mouth to answer, but no words came out. The answer was clear in his silence. Ryan's silence was more eloquent than any words. In that moment, both he and Jessica understood they had been completely exposed. Not just in front of me, but in front of a restaurant full of witnesses. "Your silence says it all, son," I murmured, feeling a mix of sadness and relief. "After all, you know me better than I thought." Jessica tried one last desperate tactic. "Susan, we can really change. Ryan has been under a lot of pressure at work lately. He hasn't been himself." I turned to her with a cold look. "Pressure at work? Is that your excuse for treating an old woman badly, for humiliating your husband's mother?" A businessman at a nearby table stood up. "Ma'am, with all due respect, I know Ryan from work, and I can confirm that he talks about you in exactly the way he has treated you tonight. He always refers to you as my poor mother or the burden I have to support." Ryan turned pale as death. "Mr. Martinez, I never—" That was taken out of context. "Taken out of context," Mr. Martinez laughed. "Ryan, last month during the executive meeting you said, and I quote, 'My mother is a simple woman who doesn't understand my standard of living. Sometimes it's embarrassing to have to explain why she can't join me at important social events. Period.'" A murmur of outrage spread through the restaurant. Ryan tried to deny it, but the damage was done. "You see, Ryan," I said in a calm voice, "this isn't just about tonight. It's about how you really think of me. It's about the shame you feel for your own mother." I addressed the entire restaurant again. "Ladies and gentlemen, for years, I have watched my son become a person I don't recognize, a person who values appearances more than feelings, a person who is ashamed of his roots." I walked slowly to the large restaurant window where you could see the whole illuminated city. "You see that city out there? I started from the bottom in the humblest neighborhoods. I worked washing dishes, cleaning tables, serving people who sometimes treated me poorly. But I never lost my dignity." I turned back to Ryan, who had his head down, completely defeated. "Yet my own son, my own blood has made me feel more humiliated in these past few years than any stranger ever has." Jessica started to cry harder. "Susan, please give us a chance. We can go to family therapy. We can fix this." "Family therapy," I laughed bitterly. "Jessica, do you really think this can be fixed with therapy? Do you think years of contempt and humiliation can be cured with a few sessions?" Oscar discreetly approached. "Mrs. Miller, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there are several reporters outside. It seems someone has leaked the story on social media. Do you want me to keep them away?" Ryan stood up sharply. "Reporters. Mom, this is going to ruin my career. My boss is going to find out. Everyone at my company will know what happened." "Now you're worried about your career," I replied firmly. "You weren't worried when you were screaming at me in front of the whole restaurant. It's different," Ryan shouted desperately. "This was a private conversation between family." "Private," I pointed around the crowded restaurant. You yell at your mother in a public restaurant, and you call it a private conversation. Mr. Martinez spoke up again. Ryan, I'm sorry to tell you this, but several employees from our company are dining here tonight. The story has already reached the office. Your behavior is going to be reviewed by Human Resources. Ryan collapsed into his chair as if he'd been punched. No, it can't be. My career. My reputation. Your reputation, I repeated slowly. You ruined it yourself the moment you decided it was acceptable to treat your mother like trash. Jessica tried to take Ryan's hand, but he pulled it away sharply. This is all your fault, he yelled at her. You were the one who convinced me my mother was a burden. You were the one who told me to be ashamed of her. My fault? Jessica stood up indignant. You were the one constantly complaining about her. I was just supporting you. And there it was, the truth finally coming out. Not only had they humiliated me tonight, but they had been bad-mouthing me for years, feeding each other's contempt for me. Enough, I said in a firm voice. Enough blaming each other. You are both equally responsible. I turned to Hector. Please bring the documents. What documents? Ryan asked, his voice filled with terror. Hector disappeared for a few moments and returned with a thick folder. He opened it on the table and took out several papers. These, I said solemnly, are the documents confirming that I own not only this restaurant, but a chain of 5 restaurants throughout the city. Jessica stared at the papers with wide eyes. 5 restaurants. Yes, 5 restaurants, including the Secret Garden, where you celebrated your anniversary last year, including Ocean View, where Ryan took his important clients last month, and including the Golden Terrace, where Jessica celebrated her birthday. Ryan looked up sharply. You own all those places. That's right, and every time you went to those restaurants bragging about your success, your money, your social status, you were spending money in businesses that belonged to me. The irony of the situation was not lost on anyone. Several diners began to laugh softly, enjoying the poetic justice of the moment. But there's more. I continued, pulling another document from the folder. This is my current will. The silence that followed was absolute. You could hear a pin drop. In this will, I said clearly, I left my entire fortune to my only son, Ryan Miller. $8 million, 5 restaurants, and several real estate properties. Ryan's eyes widened. Left? Why did you say left? I smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who had finally found justice. Because after tonight, after what you have shown yourself to be, that will is going to change. No, Ryan shouted, standing up so abruptly his chair fell backward. Mom, please. I'm your only son. I'm your family. My family? I laughed. Ryan, an hour ago you told me to go eat on the street like a beggar. Is that how you treat your family? Jessica stood up too, panic in her eyes. Susan, please think this through. Ryan made a mistake, but he's still your son. Blood is thicker than water. Blood is thicker than water, I repeated. Then why has my own blood treated me worse than any stranger? I turned to the entire restaurant. Ladies and gentlemen, you have witnessed everything that has happened here tonight. You have seen how my son has treated me, how he has humiliated me, how he has been ashamed of me. The diners nodded, many with expressions of approval for my stance. Well then, I continued, you are also going to be witnesses to the consequences. I took out my cell phone and dialed a number Ryan didn't recognize. Good evening, Mr. Antonio Lopez. Yes, this is Susan Miller. I need you to come to the Golden Crown restaurant immediately with the documents we prepared last week. Yes, it's urgent. The new will. Ryan froze. New will? You already prepared a new will. I ended the call and looked him straight in the eyes. Ryan, did you really think this was the first time you've humiliated me? Did you think I hadn't noticed how you've treated me all these years? Jessica intervened desperately. But Susan, don't you think you're being too drastic? He's your only son. Drastic! I turned to her with contained fury. Jessica, for the last 5 years, your husband has systematically excluded me from his life. He has made me feel like a stranger in my own family. I walked to the center of the restaurant where everyone could hear me clearly. My voice rose with an authority that surprised even me. "Do you want to know why I chose to live simply despite having money?" I asked the entire restaurant. "Because I wanted to test something. I wanted to see if the people who claimed to love me really did it for who I am, not for what I have." A murmur of understanding spread through the tables. People were beginning to understand the depth of my social experiment. "For 7 years," I continued, "I have lived in a modest apartment, worn simple clothes, taken the bus, and acted as if I were a common retiree. And do you know what I discovered?" Ryan looked at me with growing terror, as if he finally understood the magnitude of what he had done. "I discovered that my own son was ashamed of me. I discovered that he saw me as a burden. I discovered that he would rather exclude me from his life than explain to his rich friends that he had a poor mother, period." Tears started to form in my eyes, but my voice remained firm. "Do you know what it feels like for your own son to ask you not to come to his wedding because you don't fit the event standard?" A choked gasp was heard from several tables. Some older women had their hands over their hearts, clearly moved by my words. Ryan turned pale. "Mom, I never said that exactly." "No." I took out my phone and searched through my messages. "Here is your text message from April 15th, 2023. Mom, Jessica, and I have decided to have a small wedding, just close family and important friends. I think it would be better if you didn't come. The venue is very elegant and I don't want you to feel uncomfortable. Period." I read the message out loud for the whole restaurant to hear. The reaction was immediate. Murmurs of outrage, some applause of support for me, and shocked expressions on the faces of the diners. "That message doesn't say you can't come," Ryan protested desperately. "No," I continued reading. "Besides, most of the guests are colleagues from my work and important clients. I need to maintain a certain professional image. Period." The silence that followed was deafening. Even Jessica looked ashamed. "Maintain a certain professional image," I repeated slowly. "Translated, your mother would ruin your professional image." An older man at a back table stood up. "Ma'am, my mother was right when she said that ungrateful children are the worst misfortune a woman can have." Several diners applauded his comment. The atmosphere of the restaurant had completely changed. It was no longer just a show. It had become a public trial on family values. Ryan looked around the restaurant, noticing for the first time that all the attention was truly on us. "Mom, please let's go home. We can talk about this in private." "Home?" I laughed bitterly. "To which home, Ryan? To my modest apartment that you're so ashamed of? Or to your big house in the exclusive neighborhood where I've never been welcome?" Jessica tried to intervene. "Susan, you have always been welcome in our home." "Welcome." I took out my phone again. "Let me read you some of the messages Jessica has sent me over the past 2 years. Jessica turned pale. "No, please." "Message from December 8th, 2024. I read aloud. "Susan, Ryan, and I are having a Christmas dinner with our friends. I think it would be better if you came another day when we can dedicate more time to you. Period." I continued reading. Message from March 22nd, 2024. "Susan, this weekend we have important guests. Could you come visit us during the week when it's quieter?" Every message I read generated more murmurs of disapproval from the nearby tables. "Do you see the pattern?" I asked the restaurant. There was always an excuse. There was always a reason why I couldn't be present when there were important people, period. Ryan sank into his chair, utterly defeated. "Mom, we thought you preferred, that I preferred what—" I cut him off. "That I preferred to be alone. That I preferred to be excluded from my only son's life." Just then, the restaurant door opened, and a distinguished man in his 60s entered carrying a leather briefcase. It was Mr. Antonio Lopez, my lawyer. "Good evening, Mrs. Miller," he greeted formally. "I brought the documents you requested." Ryan stood up abruptly. "What documents, Mom? Please don't do anything you might regret." "Regret?" I turned to him with a cold smile. "Ryan, the only thing I regret is not having done this sooner." Mr. Lopez opened his briefcase and took out several documents. asked with a broken voice. Yes, I replied calmly. I have decided to leave my fortune to charities that help elderly people abandoned by their families, and also to loyal employees who have shown me more respect and affection than my own blood. Anthony, the waiter who had been serving us all night, approached timidly. Mrs. Miller, are you sure you want to do this here in front of so many people? I smiled at him with genuine affection. Anthony, for 5 years, you have been kinder to me than my own son. You have always treated me with respect, no matter how I was dressed or how much money you thought I had. Anthony blushed. You have always been a very elegant lady, Mrs. Miller, and you always leave the best tips. Tips? Ryan looked at me confused. What tips? Anthony answered. Your mother always leaves $100 tip, young man, and she always asks about our families, about our problems. She is the most generous and kind customer we have. Ryan's mouth fell open, but no sound came out. Clearly, this was another revelation he did not expect. That's right, I confirmed. For all these years, while you thought I lived on $200 a week, I was helping employees in need, donating to charities, and supporting families in difficulty. Jessica murmured. How much money have you donated? In the last 5 years, I replied. I have donated approximately $1 million to different causes, money I could have used to live luxuriously, but which I preferred to use to help others. Spontaneous applause erupted from several tables. The diners clearly approved of my philanthropic actions. While you were ashamed of my poverty, I continued, I was using my money to do good. While you excluded me for not being sophisticated enough, I was being more generous than you have ever been. Ryan stood up in desperation. Mom, that's all very well, but I am your son. I am your only family. You can't leave all your money to strangers. Strangers? I laughed. Ryan, Anthony knows me better than you do. Oscar respects me more than you do. The employees of my restaurants have shown me more affection than you have in the last 5 years. I turned to Mr. Lopez. Mr. Lopez, please prepare the documents. I want to sign the new will tonight. No, Ryan shouted, trying to approach the table where the documents were. You can't do this. I'm your son. I have rights. Oscar intervened firmly. Young man, please maintain your composure. Mrs. Miller has every right to dispose of her fortune as she sees fit. This is insane, Jessica started crying hysterically. Susan, Ryan made a mistake, but he doesn't deserve to lose his entire inheritance. I stopped a few steps from the table with the documents and turned slowly towards Jessica. A mistake. You call 5 years of constant humiliation a mistake. Mr. Lopez placed the documents on the main table where everyone could see. Mrs. Miller, before we proceed, I must ask, are you completely sure of this decision? Once signed, these documents will be legally binding. Mr. Lopez, I replied in a firm voice, I have never been more sure of anything in my life. Ryan rushed towards the table, but Oscar and 2 waiters gently but firmly stopped him. Mom, wait. Give me a chance to explain. Give me a chance to change. A chance. I turned to him in disbelief. Ryan, you have had 5 years of chances. Every time you excluded me from an event was a lost chance. Every time you were ashamed of me was a lost chance. Jessica stood up, stumbling slightly. Susan, please think about this rationally. If you take away Ryan's inheritance, you are also punishing your future grandchildren. A sad smile crossed my face. My future grandchildren, Jessica, you have been married for 3 years. How many times have you included me in conversations about having children? How many times have you made me feel that I would be a welcome grandmother? Jessica couldn't answer. The truth is, I continued, you don't want me to be part of your future children's lives. You don't want a poor and uneducated grandmother to influence the upbringing of your successful children. Period. A murmur of understanding was heard throughout the restaurant. The diners could clearly see the logic in my words. Mr. Lopez opened the document folder. Mrs. Miller, here are the new documents. The will divides your fortune among 5 charitable organizations and 10 employees of your restaurants who have shown exceptional loyalty. Ryan tried to approach again, but this time his voice was pleading. "Mom, please at least leave me a small part. Not everything, but something. A chance to show you I can change." I paused with the pen in my hand. "A small part. So you can continue living comfortably without learning anything from this experience." "No," Ryan protested. "So I can prove that I've learned my lesson, so I can win you back." Jessica approached me with tears in her eyes. "Susan, give him a chance. Set conditions. Make him earn your forgiveness." I looked at my son, who stood there with red eyes and a broken face. For the first time in years, I saw real vulnerability in him, not the superficial arrogance he had shown for so long. "Conditions," I repeated slowly. "What kind of conditions?" Ryan lit up with hope. "Whatever you want, Mom. Anything. I'll do whatever it takes." Mr. Lopez looked at me questioningly. "Mrs. Miller, would you like to explore that option? We can create a conditional will." I walked slowly around the table, considering the possibilities. The entire restaurant was in absolute silence, awaiting my decision. "Very well," I said finally. "If you really want a chance, Ryan, here are my conditions." Ryan nodded desperately. "Yes, anything." "First condition," I announced clearly for the whole restaurant to hear. "For the next year, you and Jessica will volunteer at a nursing home, every weekend. No exceptions." Jessica opened her mouth to protest, but Ryan stopped her. "I accept. What else?" "Second condition, you will move out of your big house and live on a budget of $1,500 a month, the same budget you thought I had." Ryan paled. "But Mom, my mortgage, my expenses." "What, Ryan? You can't live on the budget you considered adequate for your mother." The comment drew some nervous laughter from nearby tables. "Third condition," I continued. "You will work part-time in one of my restaurants, as a waiter. You will experience what it is to serve others, to treat people from all social classes with respect." "As a waiter?" Jessica asked in horror. "But Ryan is an executive." "Exactly," I replied. "And it's time he learned humility." Ryan took a deep breath. "I accept. There's more. Fourth condition, you will write public letters of apology. A letter to the local newspaper apologizing for your behavior towards the elderly. A letter to your company taking responsibility for your lack of family values." The color completely drained from Ryan's face. "Mom, that would ruin my career." "Your career," I laughed. "Ryan, after what happened here tonight, your career is already ruined. This would at least give you a chance to save it with dignity." Mr. Martinez, Ryan's colleague, stood up. "Excuse me, Mrs. Miller, but I must tell you that the company is already considering suspending Ryan. His behavior tonight goes against all of our corporate values." Ryan turned to him in desperation. "Mr. Martinez, please." "I'm sorry, Ryan," Mr. Martinez replied firmly. "Our company values family respect and personal integrity. What we have seen here tonight is unacceptable." I turned back to Ryan. "You see, your career is already in jeopardy. My conditions would at least give you a way to redeem yourself." "And the fifth condition?" Ryan asked with a broken voice. "The fifth condition is the most important," I said solemnly. "For 1 full year, you and Jessica will visit me every week. Not because I have money, but because I am your mother. You will spend time with me. You will really get to know me. You will learn who I am as a person." Jessica muttered. That doesn't sound so hard." "No." I turned to her. "Jessica, when was the last time you had a real conversation with me? A conversation where you asked me about my dreams, my fears, my life experiences?" Jessica could not answer. "And do you know what the sixth condition is?" I added. "Sixth?" Ryan asked nervously. "If during this 1-year trial you fail to meet any of these conditions, or if you show that you are only acting for the money, the original will is automatically activated. All the money will go to charity." Mr. Lopez nodded. "That is perfectly legal, Mrs. Miller. We can create a conditional will with those specifications." Ryan looked at Jessica, who nodded reluctantly. "I accept all the conditions, Mom. I accept them completely." "Good," I said, picking up the pen. "But there is one more thing I need to say before I sign any document." The whole restaurant held its breath. What happened here tonight cannot be undone. The words you said, the humiliation you caused me, the pain you made me feel. That is now part of our history. Ryan nodded with tears in his eyes. I know, Mom. I know. And I am so sorry. Don't tell me you're sorry, I replied firmly. Show me. Show me over the next year that you have truly learned something from this experience. I turned to Mr. Lopez. Mr. Lopez, prepare the conditional will with all the conditions I have mentioned. Of course, Mrs. Miller, he replied, beginning to write. While the lawyer prepared the documents, I addressed the entire restaurant one more time. Ladies and gentlemen, you have witnessed a very important lesson tonight. You have seen what happens when people value money more than respect, when they confuse material success with human worth. Applause began from one table and spread throughout the restaurant. It was applause of approval, of respect, of admiration for how I had handled the situation. I hope, I continued, that all of you remember this night when you interact with your own families. I hope you remember that respect and love do not have an entrance fee. The applause grew louder. Some people stood up, giving me an ovation. Ryan approached me timidly. Mom, can I hug you? I looked at him for a long moment. Ryan, hugs are something you earn. Over the next year, you are going to have to earn every hug, every smile, every moment of affection. He nodded, finally understanding the magnitude of what he had lost. 6 months after that life-changing night, I found myself sitting at the same table in the Golden Crown restaurant. But this time, the atmosphere was completely different. There was no tension, no shouting, no humiliation. There was just a 65-year-old woman watching her son work as a waiter in his own restaurant. Ryan approached my table with a tray in his hands, wearing the restaurant's black uniform. His face no longer showed arrogance or shame. There was something new in his eyes, genuine humility. Good evening, Mrs. Miller, he said with a smile that seemed real for the first time in years. What would you like to order tonight? I smiled but kept my composure. Ryan, how was your day? Tough, he admitted, sitting in the chair across from me when I gestured. A customer yelled at me because his soup was too hot. Another complained because it took me 30 seconds to bring him water. And one lady treated me like I was invisible. And how did that make you feel? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Ryan looked down. Horrible. Humiliated. Like I wasn't a whole person. He looked up at me. Is that how I made you feel for so many years? It was the first time in months he had directly admitted the parallel between his current experience and how he had treated me. It was progress. And Jessica, I asked, how is she handling the changes? Better than I expected. Ryan answered honestly. At first, she complained a lot about the small apartment, the limited budget, the volunteer work at the nursing home. But something changed a few weeks ago. What changed? She met an 80-year-old woman named Teresa. Her children abandoned her 5 years ago. She hasn't had a single visit in all that time. Ryan paused, his eyes getting a little misty. Jessica realized that woman was exactly who you would have become if I had continued down the same path. I felt a warmth in my chest. It was the first time I heard that Jessica had made a real emotional connection to the situation. Teresa told Jessica how her children only visited when they needed money. Ryan continued, how they would promise to come for dinner, but always had last-minute excuses, how she felt invisible in her own family, and it hit her hard. Jessica cried all night after that conversation. She told me she finally understood why you did what you did. She said we were turning you into Teresa. Oscar discreetly approached our table. Mrs. Miller, pardon the interruption. Mr. Miller has been an excellent employee. He's always on time, treats everyone with respect, and the customers have commented positively on his service. Ryan blushed slightly at the praise. Thanks, Oscar. I'm learning a lot. After Oscar walked away, I looked at my son carefully. Ryan, can I ask you something honestly? Of course, Mom. Are you doing all this just for the money? Just for the inheritance? Ryan was silent for a long moment. It was a question I had been waiting for the right time to ask. At first, he finally admitted. Yes, the first few weeks, every action I took was calculated. Every word I said was to impress you. I was performing to get my inheritance back. His honesty surprised me. "But," I asked, sensing there was more. "But something changed when I started working here, when I started really interacting with people from different social classes, when I started to see how the employees talked about you with so much love and respect." Ryan paused. I realized I had been living in a bubble of arrogance for years. He leaned forward, his voice becoming more intense. "Mom, I really met Anthony for the first time. Did you know he has 3 kids and is paying for his oldest daughter's college by working here? Did you know you secretly paid for his gallbladder surgery last year?" I smiled softly. Anthony is a good man. And I treated him like he was invisible. I treated him like he was just a waiter. But he's a hard-working father, a noble man, someone who deserves respect. Ryan ran his hands through his hair. How could I have been so blind? "And what about your career?" I asked. "Do you regret losing your executive position?" Ryan laughed, but it wasn't a bitter laugh. "You know what? No. And that surprises even me." "Why not?" "Because I realized my success was built on false values. I realized I was so obsessed with impressing others that I lost sight of who I really was." Just then, Jessica walked into the restaurant. She was no longer wearing expensive dresses or flashy jewelry. She wore simple but elegant clothes, and there was something different in her posture. She seemed more authentic. "Hi, Susan." She greeted me, and for the first time in years, her greeting sounded genuine. "How are you?" "I'm well, Jessica. How was the nursing home today?" "Emotional," she replied, sitting next to Ryan. "Teresa taught me how to knit, and she told me stories about her youth during the war. It's incredible the wisdom these people have." I saw Ryan look at her with admiration. It was clear these changes in Jessica had also strengthened their relationship. "Susan," Jessica continued, "I want to apologize to you. Not just for that night in the restaurant, but for years of terrible behavior." "What do you mean specifically?" I asked. I needed to know she understood exactly what she had done wrong. "I mean all the times I excluded you from our lives because I thought you weren't sophisticated enough. I mean all the times I influenced Ryan to be ashamed of you. I mean judging your worth as a person based solely on your financial appearance." Her words sounded sincere. "And now that you know I have money, how do you feel about it?" "Honestly," Jessica smiled sadly, "I feel like an idiot. In all these months working with the elderly, I've met so many extraordinary people who live on very little money, but who have immense emotional riches." Ryan nodded. "Mom, we've learned that real wealth has nothing to do with the money in the bank." I took an envelope from my purse and placed it on the table. Ryan and Jessica looked at it with curiosity and a little nervousness. "What is that?" Ryan asked. "It's an evaluation," I replied. "For these past 6 months, I have been watching, asking, investigating. I've spoken with your supervisors at the nursing home, with your co-workers here at the restaurant, with your neighbors at the small apartment." Jessica turned pale. "An evaluation of what? Of whether your changes are genuine or if you're just performing for the money." I opened the envelope and took out several papers. "Here is the report from the nursing home supervisor. It says that you not only meet your required hours, but you often stay extra time. It says you have connected emotionally with the residents." Ryan and Jessica exchanged hopeful glances. "Here is Oscar's report on Ryan's performance as a waiter. He says he is respectful, hard-working, and genuinely cares about the customer's experience." I continued reading. "And here are your neighbors' observations on how you live now. They say you are humble, that you help other residents, that you don't complain about your reduced circumstances." "And what is your conclusion?" Jessica asked with a trembling voice. I put the papers back in the envelope and looked them straight in the eyes. "My conclusion is that you have learned your lesson. Not completely, because 6 months don't erase 5 years of problematic behavior, but you have proven that change is possible." Ryan started to smile hopefully. "Does that mean—" "It means," I said solemnly, "that we are going to continue with this process, but with modifications. "What kind of modifications?" Jessica asked. "First, Ryan will continue working at the restaurant, but he will now receive a fair salary and have the opportunity to learn the business from the ground up. If he shows real ability and dedication, he could eventually have a role in management." Ryan nodded enthusiastically. "Second, you will move into a larger apartment, but you will not return to your previous lifestyle. You will live comfortably, but modestly. And third," I continued, "we are going to start spending time together as a family. Real time, not an act. We are going to get to know each other as people." Jessica began to cry, but these were tears of relief and gratitude. "Thank you, Susan. Thank you for giving us this chance." "Don't thank me yet," I said firmly. "This is just the beginning. You have to keep proving that these changes are permanent." Ryan took my hand. "Mom, I want you to know something. Even if you decide not to leave me any money, these months have been the most valuable of my life. I've learned who I really want to be." For the first time in years, I allowed tears to flow freely down my cheeks. "You know what, Ryan? That's the only thing I ever wanted to hear you say." I stood up and looked around the restaurant where everything had changed 6 months ago. "That night when those cruel words came out of your mouth, I thought I had lost my son forever. But now I see I didn't lose him. He was just hidden under layers of arrogance and false values." Ryan stood up too and looked me in the eyes. "Mom, can I hug you now?" I smiled, remembering my words from that night that hugs were something to be earned. "Yes, son, you've earned this hug." When Ryan hugged me, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, the unconditional love of a son who finally understood his mother's worth. Not for her money, not for what she could give him, but for who she was as a person. Jessica joined the hug, and for the first time in a long time, I truly felt like I had a family. As we parted, I looked towards the tables of the restaurant. Some of the diners who had witnessed that terrible night were there again, and several smiled and nodded at me in approval. "Do you know what's the most ironic part of all this?" I said to Ryan. "What? That by losing your arrogance and your obsession with money, you have finally become someone worthy of inheriting a fortune." Ryan smiled, but it was a different kind of smile. It was the smile of someone who had found something more valuable than money. He had found his humanity, and I, Susan Miller, had found something I thought I had lost forever. I had found my son. Real wealth, after all, isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in respect, in genuine love, and in the ability to see the value in every person, no matter what they have or don't have. That night, as we left the restaurant together as a real family for the first time in years, I knew I had made the right decision. Sometimes to save someone you love, you first have to be willing to lose them. And sometimes the greatest wealth you can leave your children isn't money, but the lesson of how to be a good person.